The ground beneath your feet. You didn't see it coming. Nobody ever does. One morning you wake up and everything makes sense. The alarm, the coffee, the commute, the routine that holds your days together like stitching in a seam. And then, without warning, the seam tears. The call from the doctor, the pink slip on your desk, the text message at 11 p.m. that unravels years in 4 words, the bank notification that makes your stomach drop through the floor. Suddenly the life you were living, the one you planned, worked for, assumed would continue, is gone. And you're standing in the wreckage, trying to remember how to breathe. This is not a book about avoiding that moment. That moment is coming for everyone. It has probably already come for you. Maybe more than once. This is a book about what you do inside that moment. How you think. How you feel. How you decide. Because there is a skill, one skill above all others, that determines whether you get crushed by life's storms or whether you become someone who can stand steady inside them. That skill is not luck. It's not money. It's not even resilience in the traditional sense. It is the ability to find genuine, unshakable calm in the center of chaos. Not the calm of denial, not the numb performance of someone who has shut themselves off from feeling, but the deep-rooted stillness of someone who has learned something profound about the nature of existence, and who uses that understanding as an anchor when everything else is moving. Let's begin where all real transformation begins, with the truth we spend most of our lives running from. The illusion you were never supposed to question here is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of most human suffering. You are not in control. You never were. And the moment you truly understand this, not intellectually, but in your gut, something extraordinary happens. You stop suffering in the way you have been suffering. Every human being walks through life carrying an invisible assumption. I can manage this. I can predict what comes next. I can hold it all together if I just try hard enough. This assumption is both the engine of human ambition and the source of our deepest anguish. It drives us to build, to plan, to strive. But it also sets us up for a specific kind of devastation when reality refuses to cooperate with our expectations. A marketing executive in Chicago named Marcus had planned every year of his professional life like a chess grandmaster. He had contingency plans for his contingency plans. When his company was acquired and his entire department eliminated, he didn't just lose a job. He lost the story he had been telling himself about who he was and how the world worked. For 3 months, he didn't sleep properly. He raged against the unfairness of it. He spent his days obsessively rehearsing what he should have done differently, what he should have seen coming, what he would have done had he just paid closer attention. He was fighting reality. And reality, as it always does, won. The problem with Marcus wasn't that he lost his job. People lose jobs. The problem was his relationship with the fact of losing it, his refusal to accept that it had happened, his exhausting insistence that things should have been different, his desperate attempt to mentally undo something that could not be undone. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome understood this trap with remarkable clarity. They drew a circle around 2 distinct categories, things within your power and things outside it. Within your power, your thoughts, your interpretations, your choices, your responses, your effort. Outside your power, other people's decisions, economic forces, illness, accident, weather, time itself. When you pour your energy inside that circle into what you can genuinely influence, you feel capable, grounded, and effective. When you pour your energy outside it, When you exhaust yourself railing against forces that operate completely indifferent to your suffering, you feel powerless, panicked, and lost. Marcus eventually found his way out, but not by improving his resume or networking more aggressively. He found it the night he sat in his apartment and said, out loud to no one, "I lost my job. That happened. It can't unhappen. What do I do now?" 5 words changed everything. What do I do now? That is the question of someone who has stopped fighting reality and started working with it. It is the question that only becomes available to you once you accept what has actually occurred. And it is the only question that leads anywhere useful. This is not passivity. It is not defeat. It is the most strategic move available to any human being in crisis. Redirect every ounce of energy from the resistance column to the response column. Stop spending on what you cannot change. Start investing in what you can. Traffic is a useful practice ground for this principle. The next time you find yourself stuck on the highway, watch what your mind does. It protests. It argues. It performs an elaborate mental theater in which the traffic is personally targeting you, in which your schedule somehow matters to the thousands of brake lights ahead. None of this performance has any effect on the traffic. It only has an effect on your nervous system, your blood pressure, and your mood. None of them good. Now, try this instead. Notice the protest arising in your mind. Don't fight the protest. Just notice it. Then ask, what can I actually do right now? Maybe the answer is to listen to something that interests you. Maybe it is to breathe deeply and let your body soften. Maybe it is simply to observe the sky above the cars, which is beautiful, regardless of what the cars are doing. You have just practiced the foundational skill of unshakable calm. You have separated what you cannot control from what you can. You have redirected your attention from the wall. You cannot move to the door that is right in front of you. Scale this up to the biggest crisis of your life. The job is gone. The relationship is over. The diagnosis has been given. The money has disappeared. None of these facts can be undone by your resistance to them, but all of them present a door. Given that this is now the reality, what can I do? What options exist? What resources are available? What has not yet been tried? What might be hidden within what appears to be a disaster? The people who emerge from crisis stronger, and they exist, they are real, and their strength is earned rather than inherited, are not people who avoided difficulty. They are people who train themselves to ask better questions. Not why is this happening to me, but what is available to me right now? Not how do I make this not be true, but now that it is true, how do I move? This mental habit is a muscle. It atrophies without use and strengthens with practice. Start small. Build it into ordinary inconveniences, so that when the extraordinary inconvenience arrives, and it will, you already know the movement. The gift hidden inside impermanence. There is a sentence that has pulled more people through darkness than almost any other. This too shall pass. It sounds like a cliche because it has been said so many times. But the reason it has been said so many times is because it is true, and not just comfortingly true, but structurally, actually, demonstrably true. Everything changes. Everything passes. Nothing in the material universe maintains its current form indefinitely. Not weather, not emotions, not relationships, not economies, not even mountains. The crisis you are in right now, however permanent it feels, is not permanent. It is a chapter, and chapters end. But here is the paradox that most people miss when they encounter this idea. While your current circumstances are temporary, the person you become by navigating them is not. The strength you build by facing difficulty does not disappear when the difficulty does. It stays. It becomes part of the architecture of who you are. A woman named Elena had built her entire identity around her role as a long-distance runner. When a knee injury sidelined her for 14 months, 3 surgeries, physical therapy twice a week, the slow and humiliating process of relearning to walk without a limp, she described it as the loss of herself. "I don't know who I am if I'm not running," she said in the early weeks. She became depressed. She stopped socializing. She let her apartment grow cluttered and her eating erratic. At her lowest point, her physical therapist, a no-nonsense woman from Atlanta named Daria, said something that shifted everything. "Your knee is a temporary situation," Daria said, "but who you're deciding to be right now, that's becoming permanent." Elena started paying attention to that choice. She began studying sports psychology, first as a patient trying to understand her own mind, then with genuine academic interest. By the time she ran again, and she did run again, she had also completed a certification in mental performance coaching and had begun working with college athletes. The injury was over, but everything she had learned inside the injury stayed. This is not a story about silver linings. Elena would have preferred not to suffer through 14 months of physical limitation and grief. The point is not that the injury was good. The point is that the person who emerged from it was larger than the person who went in, and that expansion became permanent in a way the injury never could. Most people make a specific and painful error when crisis arrives. They fuse their identity with their circumstances. When you lose your job, you think I am unemployed, as if unemployment is a defining characteristic of your personhood, rather than a temporary situation. When a relationship ends, you think I am alone, as if solitude is your destiny, rather than your current condition. When money runs out, you think I am a failure, as if your bank balance is a measure of your worth. These fusions are understandable. They are also extraordinarily destructive, because once you believe that your current circumstances define you, you begin to behave as if they will last forever. You make decisions from panic rather than wisdom. You close yourself off to possibilities that could only be seen from a clearer vantage point. You spend so much energy defending yourself against a permanent reality that you fail to notice the reality is already shifting beneath your feet. The practice of recognizing impermanence is not an exercise in denial or forced positivity. It is an exercise in accurate perception. Your current circumstances are temporary. That is not wishful thinking. It is observable fact. The question is not whether they will change, but whether you will have positioned yourself, mentally and emotionally, to move well when they do. Here is a simple practice. Think back to 5 years ago. What was the crisis of that period? What kept you awake at 3 a.m., convinced that the damage was permanent? Where are those circumstances now? In most cases, they have changed. In many cases, the very disruptions that felt catastrophic became pivot points towards something better. Not because suffering is romantic, but because disruption forces adaptation. And adaptation is always growth, even when it doesn't feel like it. Hold your current difficulty lightly, not dismissively, not by pretending it doesn't hurt. Hold it the way you would hold a heavy stone in your open palm, fully feeling its weight, but not clutching it to your chest. Feel the full reality of what you're facing, and simultaneously remember, this is not the whole story. This is not the last chapter. This is the part of the book that makes the resolution meaningful. The storm is real. The storm is also temporary. The person who learns to stand inside it, that person is permanent, building the inner room, no storm can touch. Imagine a room inside you, not a metaphor, or not only a metaphor, a real psychological space, a place of stillness, clarity, and perspective that exists independent of what is happening in your external world. Most people have never visited this room. They have spent their entire lives living in the outer rooms, the ones whose furniture rearranges itself according to circumstances, whose temperature changes with every piece of bad news, whose walls shake with every tremor in the world outside. They have learned to manage the outer rooms, to redecorate them, to try to control who enters. But they have never discovered the inner room. That inner room is what the world's wisdom traditions have pointed toward for thousands of years. The Buddhists call it the witness. The Stoics call it the ruling faculty. Modern psychologists call it the observing self. Whatever the name, the description is consistent. There is a part of you that can watch your thoughts and emotions without being consumed by them. A part of you that notices fear without becoming fear. That sees sadness without drowning in it. That observes the storm without being the storm. Access to this inner room is the single most powerful capacity you can develop as a human being. And unlike most powerful capacities, it does not require talent, money, or favorable circumstances. It requires only practice. The practice begins with the simplest possible instruction. Step back. When you're in the middle of a crisis, when your mind is spinning with worst-case scenarios, when your body is flooded with adrenaline, when every thought seems to confirm that the situation is catastrophic, there is a move available to you. You step back, not physically, not by running away from the problem, but by shifting your attention from inside the experience to watching the experience. Instead of, I am terrified, you notice, I observe that terror is present. Instead of this is a disaster, you notice, I observe that my mind is interpreting this as a disaster. Instead of being the weather, you become the sky. This is not as abstract as it sounds. Here is how it feels in practice. A software engineer named Priya was blindsided when her startup, the company she had co-founded and spent 4 years building, ran out of funding and collapsed in a single catastrophic week. The morning after the company formally closed, she sat in her apartment in a state of complete overwhelm. Her mind was a cacophony of loss, fear, anger, shame, and grief, all speaking simultaneously. She had learned in a mindfulness course she had taken almost casually a year earlier one technique: name what you observe. So she sat with the noise in her mind and began quietly to name what she saw. Fear about money, fear about reputation, grief about the team, anger at the investors, shame about what people will think. She named each one like a botanist cataloging specimens in a field, not judging them, not amplifying them, just noting their presence. Something shifted. The overwhelming roar began to differentiate into distinct, manageable signals. And beneath the signals, she noticed something else. A quiet. Not a complete quiet, but a underneath quiet. A stillness that existed prior to all the noise. That stillness was the inner room. She could not live in the inner room that morning. The emotions were too fresh, too intense. But she had visited it. She had confirmed it existed. And that confirmation, the knowledge that beneath the chaos there was a stable ground, changed how she moved through the following weeks. Building access to the inner room requires daily practice during ordinary times, not just crisis moments. The people who can find stillness when the stakes are highest are people who have practiced finding stillness when the stakes were low. You cannot train for a marathon by attempting it on race day. You build the capacity in ordinary hours, ordinary mornings, ordinary minutes. What does this practice look like? For some people, it is meditation, 5 to 20 minutes of simply sitting with awareness, noticing thoughts arising and passing without chasing them. For others, it is a walk taken in genuine presence, without earbuds or a phone, simply observing the environment with curious attention. For others, it is journaling, writing down what is happening inside without judgment, as if writing to a trusted stranger about a mutual friend's experience. The specific form matters less than the consistent practice of stepping back from your immediate reactions to observe them. Every time you do this, you strengthen the capacity. Every time you notice I am noticing my anxiety rather than simply I am anxious, you have created an increment of freedom. There is also the matter of emotional independence, learning to locate your inner stability in your own relationship with yourself rather than in other people's behavior or approval. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of psychological resilience. Emotional independence does not mean not needing people. It does not mean closing yourself off from love, support, or connection. It means that your fundamental sense of okayness is not entirely outsourced to other people's moods, choices, or opinions of you. When your inner room is strong, you can be fully present with someone in their pain without being destroyed by it. You can receive criticism without being dismantled by it. You can hold space for other people's crises without losing your own ground. This is not coldness. It is the opposite of coldness. It is the kind of stable presence that can actually help someone because it does not collapse under the weight of their need. The inner room is always available. It cannot be taken from you. External circumstances can disrupt everything else: your finances, your relationships, your plans, your reputation. They cannot enter the inner room unless you invite them. Your work is not to build that room. It already exists. Your work is to find your way back to it again and again until the path becomes automatic. What radical acceptance actually means and what it doesn't. There is a word that stops people cold when they first hear it in the context of crisis. That word is acceptance. The immediate reaction is almost universal. Acceptance means giving up. Acceptance means deciding nothing matters. Acceptance means approving of what has happened to me. And I will never approve of this. This reaction makes complete sense. And it is completely wrong. Radical acceptance has nothing to do with approval. It has nothing to do with passivity. It is, in fact, the prerequisite for effective action. You cannot respond wisely to a situation you are still mentally arguing against. You cannot solve a problem you refuse to acknowledge. Acceptance is not the end point. It is the beginning. Think about what happens in your mind when something unwanted occurs. The immediate reflex is resistance, a loud, insistent voice that says, "This should not be happening." You replay the events that led here, looking for the moment you could have changed the outcome. You construct elaborate alternate universes in which things went differently. You exhaust your mental and emotional resources, fighting a battle that is, by definition, already over. None of this changes what happened. All of it makes it harder to deal with what happened. A man named James had been in a serious car accident that left him with significant hearing loss in his left ear. For months after the accident, his dominant mental activity was the refusal to accept this fact. He was consumed by what should have been. If he had left 5 minutes earlier, if he had taken a different route, if the other driver had been paying attention. He was not living in the present. He was living in an imaginary past where the accident hadn't happened, repeatedly discovering that the imaginary past was unavailable to him. His audiologist said something during one appointment that James would later describe as the moment his recovery truly began. You're spending all your energy fighting the diagnosis. What if you spent that energy on adapting to it? James didn't like this suggestion, but he began slowly to practice it. He started by simply saying the fact out loud. I have significant hearing loss in my left ear. This is what is true right now. Not with bitterness, not with self-pity, just as a statement of current reality. From that acknowledgement, options became visible that had been invisible while he was busy arguing with reality. He could research the best hearing aids available. He could learn specific positioning strategies for conversations. He could be honest with friends and colleagues about his situation, rather than pretending and constantly missing things. He could advocate for himself in settings that required accommodation. These options had existed all along. He couldn't see them because he had been looking in the wrong direction, backward into a past that could not be changed, rather than forward into a present that could be navigated. This is the practical power of radical acceptance. It rotates your attention from the unchangeable to the workable, from what has already happened to what you can actually do about it. Here is a distinction worth holding carefully. There is a massive difference between accepting what has happened and accepting that nothing can improve. Radical acceptance addresses only the former. You accept the fact of the situation, fully, completely, without ongoing mental resistance. You make no claim whatsoever about the future. The future remains unwritten and workable. Only the past is fixed. Acceptance means releasing your grip on the past so your hands are free for the future. Notice also what radical acceptance does to your emotions. One of the paradoxes of human psychology is that emotions you fully acknowledge tend to move through you more quickly than emotions you resist or suppress. Fear that you accept is real and present. I am genuinely afraid right now, and that makes sense given what I'm facing. Often softens within minutes. Fear that you deny, judge, or fight against tends to harden and persist, sometimes for years. Acceptance of your emotional response to crisis is not weakness. It is accurate self-perception. You are having a crisis. You are human. Humans in crisis feel intense things. Judging yourself for feeling those things is like judging a wound for bleeding. There is also the acceptance of uncertainty, arguably the most difficult acceptance crisis demands. When the future becomes unclear, the mind naturally reaches for certainty and comes up empty. This gap between the need for certainty and the reality of uncertainty generates the specific kind of suffering we call anxiety. Fighting uncertainty is like fighting the fact that weather exists. It is a fundamental characteristic of existence. You will not eliminate it, but you can change your relationship to it. From this uncertainty must be resolved before I can function in spite of uncertainty. Psychologists call this uncertainty tolerance, and it is one of the most useful capacities a person can develop. Begin practicing radical acceptance with the small resistances of daily life. The meeting that runs long, the plan that changes at the last minute, the person who doesn't respond the way you hoped. In each of these moments, notice the resistance arising, the voice that says this shouldn't be happening, and gently, without judgment, set it down. Then ask, given what is actually happening, what is available to me? This practice, sustained over time, will make you someone who works with reality instead of against it. That shift alone will transform your experience of crisis when crisis comes. The emotional storm. Inside the storm, when life falls apart around you, something else falls apart simultaneously. Your capacity to feel any single thing at a time. Instead, you feel everything at once. Fear and anger and grief and confusion, all speaking simultaneously at full volume, an orchestra with no conductor. This is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of being human in a genuinely hard situation. But it creates a practical problem. When your emotional system is this overwhelmed, your decision-making deteriorates. You react rather than respond. You say things you don't mean. You make choices you later regret. You act from the roar of the moment rather than the wisdom you actually possess. Emotional regulation during crisis is not about turning down the volume on your feelings. It is about creating enough space between the feeling and the response that you can choose what comes next, rather than simply being carried wherever the emotional current takes you. The first thing to understand about emotions is that they are information, not commands. Fear does not mean run. Fear means I am perceiving a threat. What is actually true about this threat, and what is the wisest response? Anger does not mean attack. Anger means I am perceiving an injustice or a boundary violation. How do I address this with integrity? Grief does not mean give up. Grief means I have lost something that mattered. How do I honor that loss while still moving forward? The problem arises at the extremes. When you ignore emotional signals entirely, you lose access to important information about your situation. When you are completely consumed by emotional signals, you lose access to your capacity for wise choice. The goal is the middle path. Feel fully, then choose consciously. A technique called the stop method is remarkably effective for crisis moments. When you notice yourself spiraling, stop what you are doing. Take a slow breath, one deliberate, complete breath. Observe what is happening inside you without judgment, as if watching from a small distance. Then proceed with whatever your wiser self would choose to do next. The stop phase interrupts momentum. The breath activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural calming mechanism, within seconds. The observing creates the critical space between stimulus and response. The proceeding restores your agency. Another powerful practice is called emotional labeling. Rather than experiencing your emotional state as an undifferentiated fog of terrible, try to identify the specific emotions present. Are you afraid, ashamed, lonely, angry, overwhelmed? The more precisely you can name what you're feeling, the less intensity it carries. This is not a metaphor. Neuroimaging research has consistently shown that the act of naming an emotion activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces activity in the amygdala, literally calming the brain's alarm system. I am feeling afraid is already more manageable than I am drowning. I am feeling grief about what I've lost is already more navigable than everything is ruined. The body plays a crucial role in emotional regulation that is often underestimated. Your nervous system is not confined to your brain. It runs through every system in your body. When you are in crisis, your body tightens, your breathing shortens, your muscles brace. This physical state sends feedback to your brain that confirms the emergency, creating a loop that is difficult to interrupt at the cognitive level alone. Interrupting it at the physical level works faster. Slow, deliberate breathing, a walk outdoors, even a short one, that uses large muscle groups and exposes you to changing sensory input. Placing your hands in cold water for 30 seconds. These physical interventions are not distractions from your problem. They are recalibrations of your nervous system that make it possible to think clearly about your problem. Sleep is not a luxury during crisis. It is a non-negotiable foundation. Sleep deprivation reduces emotional regulation capacity by measurable degrees. The impulse to sacrifice sleep to address a crisis is understandable but counterproductive. You are trying to navigate a complex situation with a brain that is operating significantly below its functional capacity. Protecting your sleep during crisis is not self-indulgence. It is strategic intelligence. It is also useful to distinguish between what psychologists call primary and secondary emotions. A primary emotion is your immediate, natural response to a situation. A secondary emotion is your emotional response to your emotional response. You might feel afraid about losing your job. That's primary. Then you might feel ashamed of feeling afraid. That's secondary. The secondary emotion is almost always more damaging than the first. It adds an entire layer of suffering on top of the original suffering, and it is entirely optional. Self-compassion is the antidote to secondary emotions, not self-pity. Self-pity focuses on the unfairness of your situation and generates paralysis. Self-compassion is something different. It is the recognition that you are a human being in a hard situation, that hard situations produce hard feelings, and that you deserve the same kindness you would extend to anyone else, facing what you're facing. The voice that says, "I shouldn't be feeling this way," or "I should be handling this better," is not a motivating voice. It is a compounding voice, adding unnecessary weight to an already heavy situation. Replace it with this: "Of course, I'm feeling this way. This is difficult. What do I need right now?" You will make better decisions from that question than from any amount of self-criticism. The hidden door. Inside every disaster, there is a question that changes everything when you can actually ask it, not as spiritual performance, but as genuine inquiry. What is this making possible that wasn't possible before? Not why is this happening to me? That question has no useful answer. It leads to victimhood or to cosmic speculation, neither of which helps you move. Not why didn't I prevent this? That question leads backward into the unchangeable past. But what is this making possible? That question faces forward. It is the question of someone who has accepted the reality of their situation and is actively looking for the door that crisis always, without exception, opens somewhere. This is not toxic positivity. It is not a demand that you feel grateful for your suffering. It is simply the recognition, backed by substantial evidence from psychology, history, and the lived experience of millions of people, that breakdown consistently precedes breakthrough when the person experiencing the breakdown is willing to look for the door. A research scientist named Carmen spent 8 years building her career around a specific area of neuroscience, only to have her laboratory's funding eliminated in a single budget cycle. She was 41 years old, mid-career, with a very particular set of skills that seemed, in the immediate aftermath, to belong to a world that no longer wanted them. She described the first 6 weeks as feeling like the floor had become the ceiling. What she did not initially see, because in those early weeks she was too close to the loss to see anything clearly, was that the elimination of her lab also eliminated the specific set of constraints that had been quietly limiting her for years. The research direction she had genuinely wanted to pursue but couldn't, because of her grant obligations. The collaboration she had fantasized about, but never had time for. The book she had been meaning to write for a decade. The funding elimination was not a gift, but the space it created was. And Carmen, once she had moved through the genuine grief of the loss and allowed herself to look around, walked through the door. Within 2 years, she had joined a different institution, launched the interdisciplinary research project she had been thinking about for 8 years, and completed the first draft of a book for general readers. None of this would have happened inside the previous structure. The structure had to break first. This pattern, the structure breaking so a larger one can emerge, appears so consistently in the stories of people who have navigated major crisis that it is difficult not to treat it as a principle rather than a coincidence. Crisis strips away what was not essential. This stripping is painful, but what remains after the stripping is real, and it is often more valuable more authentic and more aligned with who you actually are than what was stripped away. The question that makes the door visible is not the question of someone who has made peace with suffering. It is the question of someone who has decided to be active rather than passive in the face of it. You are not waiting to be rescued. You are not waiting for circumstances to improve on their own. You are asking right now, with things as they are, what has this opened? What can I see now that I couldn't see before? What was I holding on to that this situation has forced me to release? Sometimes the answer is obvious within weeks. Sometimes it takes years to see clearly. The practice is to remain open to the question even when no answer is immediately available. And sometimes, not always, but more often than people expect, the answer reveals not just a door, but an entire wing of the building you were living in that you never knew was there. The courage inside vulnerability. The image most people carry of someone who handles crisis well is someone who doesn't show it. Jaw set, voice steady, no tears, no admissions of confusion or fear. Someone who handles everything alone, who never lets anyone see them struggle, who maintains at all times the appearance of having it completely under control. This image is not strength. It is armor. And armor, however impressive it looks, is extraordinarily heavy to carry, and it prevents you from receiving the things that could actually help you. True resilience does not look like this. True resilience looks like a woman sitting across from a trusted friend and saying, "I don't know what I'm doing and I'm genuinely scared." It looks like a man reaching out to his brother after months of silence and admitting, "I'm not okay." It looks like asking for help before you hit the wall instead of after. It looks, from the outside, exactly like vulnerability. And it requires more courage than stoicism ever has. Here is why vulnerability during crisis is not weakness but strategy. When you maintain the performance of having everything under control, you cut yourself off from the resources that depend on others knowing you need them. Support cannot reach you through armor. Insight cannot reach you through the performance of self-sufficiency. Practical help cannot reach you when you have told everyone, explicitly and implicitly, that you don't need it. A trauma surgeon named David, a man professionally trained and personally conditioned to manage crisis without visible distress, found himself completely derailed when his marriage ended after 17 years. He had managed every professional emergency of his career with calm authority. He was, by all external measures, someone who knew how to handle things. But this was different. And for months, he handled it the only way he knew how. Alone, in silence, maintaining his professional exterior with perfect discipline, while everything interior fell apart. He didn't tell his close friends. He didn't see a therapist. He certainly didn't let his colleagues see any indication that anything was wrong. He was, as he later described it, shipwrecked and too proud to light a flare. The breakthrough came when a younger colleague, someone David had mentored, noticed something was wrong and simply asked, not professionally, personally, "Are you okay? Because you don't seem okay." David started to give the standard answer and then stopped. For reasons he still can't fully explain, he told the truth instead. "No, I'm not okay. My marriage ended and I'm having a very hard time." The younger colleague did not look at him with diminished respect. He looked at him with recognition. And in that moment, David realized that he had been carrying the belief, unexamined beneath all his conscious thought, that admitting difficulty would destroy how people saw him. Instead, it had done the opposite. It had made him real to someone who had only seen the performance. In the weeks that followed, David started practicing vulnerability in small, controlled ways. He told two close friends what was happening. He started working with a therapist. He allowed himself, for the first time in decades, to not know the answer when someone asked how he was doing. And what he discovered was that the people who mattered to him did not think less of him. They came closer. The vulnerability, which he had expected to drive people away, instead created connection. This is the consistent finding of research on human social behavior. Authentic vulnerability creates intimacy. Performed invulnerability creates distance. The people who seem untouchable are often the most isolated, not because others don't care, but because others can't find a way in. During crisis, the practical implications of this are significant. You need help. This is not a character flaw. It is a description of your situation. The question is whether your pride or your conditioning will prevent you from accessing it. Every resource that reaches you through vulnerability, the advice, the support, the perspective, the practical assistance, is a resource you would have missed behind the armor. Vulnerability during crisis also has a less obvious benefit. It makes you more honest with yourself. When you are performing strength for an audience, you often end up performing it for yourself as well, which means you stop being accurate about what you actually need. You can't address a problem you won't acknowledge. Vulnerability begins with the private admission to yourself. This is hard. I am struggling. I need something I don't currently have. From that honest place, you can actually begin to identify and seek what you need. There is also the matter of processing. Emotions that are experienced and expressed tend to move. Emotions that are contained and denied tend to calcify. The friend who listens while you say the things you've been afraid to say out loud is not just offering comfort. They are participating in a neurologically important process. The act of putting difficult experience into language helps integrate it, makes it more manageable, and literally changes its relationship to your nervous system. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to ask for help. You are allowed to not have the answers. These are not concessions of defeat. They are acknowledgments of reality. And from that reality, honest, admitted, shared, something can actually be built. Creating ground. When everything is shifting, one of the most counterproductive things you can do in a crisis is abandon your routines. The instinct is understandable. Your world is being disrupted. Why maintain the ordinary rhythms of an ordinary life that no longer exists? And why exercise when everything is falling apart? Why keep regular sleep hours when your mind won't stop spinning? Why eat properly when you barely feel like eating at all? Here is why. Because during crisis, your external world has become unpredictable. Your internal world, the world you create through your habits and practices, can remain stable. And that stability is not a luxury. It is a lifeline. Think of your daily practices as the scaffolding that holds the structure upright while the walls are being rebuilt. The building may be damaged, but without scaffolding, it cannot be repaired. Your routines, your sleep, your movement, your nutrition, your time for reflection, your connection with people who matter, are the scaffolding of your psychological life. When the damage is greatest, the scaffolding becomes most essential, not least. A financial crisis hit a small business owner named Michael so quickly and completely that within 3 months he had lost everything he had spent 9 years building. He described the first 2 weeks as complete disorientation. He didn't know what day it was, couldn't remember whether he had eaten, slept unpredictably and badly, and spent most of his waking hours staring at spreadsheets that confirmed again and again how bad things were. His recovery began, paradoxically, with the smallest possible act of structure. He started making his coffee at the same time every morning. This sounds almost absurdly small. It was not. That cup of coffee at the same time every day, followed gradually by a short walk, then by a fixed hour set aside for problem solving and a fixed hour set aside for rest, created the first islands of predictability in an otherwise chaotic sea. Those islands became the base from which everything else was rebuilt. The science behind this is not mysterious. Human beings are biological creatures whose systems operate optimally within rhythms. Sleep, cortisol, hunger, alertness, mood, all of these follow rhythmic patterns that are disrupted by crisis and restored by consistent behavior. When your external world is disrupting every rhythm it can reach, your internal practices become the primary available source of biological order. During crisis, identify the minimum viable version of your most important practices and commit to them with consistency rather than perfection. Not an ambitious hour of meditation every morning, 5 minutes of sitting quietly before the day begins. Not a demanding workout, a 20-minute walk. Not an elaborate meal, one nourishing meal each day, eaten without screens, actually tasted and experienced. These small consistencies send a signal to your nervous system. The world is not entirely out of control. Some things remain predictable. Some things remain within my choosing. This signal matters more than its apparent size. There is also the matter of your physical environment. Where you spend your time affects how you feel, and how you feel affects how you think. During periods of external chaos, the condition of your immediate physical space has unusual psychological weight. A cluttered, disorganized environment during crisis can feel like an extension of the crisis. More evidence that everything is disordered and beyond management. You cannot always control your living situation during a crisis, but you can almost always create one small space of order and calm. A desk that is clear, a corner of a room that is organized, a bedroom that is kept neat even when everything else is in upheaval. This single-ordered space functions as a psychological anchor. It is evidence, visible and constant, that some corner of your world responds to your intention and care. The relationships you maintain during crisis also function as anchors. Not the relationships that demand things from you or add to your weight, but the ones that offer genuine steadiness and care. Maintaining contact with even one or two such people, not necessarily deeply, not necessarily frequently, but consistently, provides a form of social scaffolding that prevents the isolation that tends to deepen crisis. Financial practice during crisis deserves specific mention. Even when income has been dramatically reduced or eliminated, maintaining some form of financial discipline, tracking expenses, identifying what can be reduced, setting aside even small amounts when possible, provides an experience of forward motion and agency that has psychological value beyond its practical impact. You are not giving up. You are taking care of your future self. That act, repeated daily, maintains a thread of hope and self-respect through even the most difficult periods. The ground you create during crisis through these practices becomes the ground from which rebuilding becomes possible. You cannot build on shifting sand. Every consistent practice is one more piece of solid earth beneath your feet. The only place you actually have power. Your mind is a time machine with a bias toward the worst possible destinations. Left to its own devices during crisis, it will spend most of its time in two places. Back in the past, replaying what went wrong and who is to blame, rehearsing alternate timelines in which things went differently, or forward into the future, constructing increasingly detailed catastrophes, inventorying everything that might go wrong, calculating the maximum possible damage in vivid and comprehensive detail. What your mind will not naturally do during crisis, What you have to choose repeatedly with deliberate intention is stay here, in the present, in the actual moment you are currently in. This is where all your power lives. Not in the past, which has already happened. Not in the future, which has not yet happened. In the present, the only place where action is available, where choice is possible, where reality can actually be engaged. Every serious, contemplative tradition in human history has pointed to this. The Buddhist practice of mindfulness, the Stoic emphasis on what is up to us right now, the Christian instruction to take no thought for tomorrow, the psychological practices of present-centered therapy, they are all pointing at the same thing. The present moment is not just where you happen to be. It is the only place anything real ever occurs. During crisis, the practical cost of leaving the present is especially high. When your mind is generating detailed scenarios about everything that might go wrong 6 months from now, it is consuming cognitive and emotional resources that could be used for the one thing that actually changes outcomes, deciding what to do right now. The anxiety about future catastrophes does not prevent those catastrophes. It only depletes the resources that might. Similarly, the mental energy spent replaying what went wrong, analyzing, assigning blame, constructing alternate histories, is energy that is not available for navigating what is actually happening. The past cannot be changed by your attention to it. The present can be influenced by nothing else. A single mother named Grace had lost her stable corporate job and was navigating the genuine uncertainty of what would come next. Whether she could make her next rent payment, whether she could afford her children's school expenses, whether the freelance work she was scrambling to build would be enough. Her mind was, understandably, in near constant motion between past regrets and future fears. Her therapist gave her a single instruction that she described as the most practically useful thing anyone said to her throughout the entire crisis. Every time you notice your mind in the past or the future, ask one question. What is actually happening right now? Not what happened. Not what might happen. What is happening right now in this moment? The answers, most of the time, were manageable. Right now, I am sitting in my kitchen. My children are in school and they are safe. I have food in the refrigerator. I have a phone call with a potential client this afternoon. Right now, in this moment, I am okay. This did not solve Grace's financial problems, but it repeatedly interrupted the spiral of catastrophizing that was preventing her from thinking clearly about solutions. By staying in the present moment, she became capable of seeing the options that were actually available to her. Options invisible from the vantage point of imagined future disaster. The physical body is your most reliable anchor to the present moment. Your body is always, only, right now. It is never in the past or the future. So when your mind pulls you backward or forward, your body can always pull you back. 5 deep breaths. Your feet pressing into the floor. The temperature of the air entering your lungs. The weight of your hands on your thighs. These physical sensations exist only in the present, and directing attention to them creates an almost immediate interruption of temporal spiraling. This practice does not require any particular belief system or any unusual ability. It requires only willingness. The willingness to bring your attention back to this moment again and again, every time you notice it has wandered. The wandering is not a failure. The returning is the practice. Both are normal. The skill is the returning. Present moment awareness during crisis also creates access to something that temporal spiraling reliably obscures, the good things that exist right now, even within the difficulty. Even during the worst crises, the present moment usually contains something that is not crisis. A decent cup of coffee, sunlight coming through a window, the laughter of a child in another room, a moment of genuine warmth between two people who care about each other. These moments are not insignificant consolations. They are reminders that life contains more than its worst experiences, and you can only access that reminder from the present moment. Building strength that lasts. Every crisis you survive leaves something behind. The question is whether you are conscious about what that something is. For many people, the residue of crisis is primarily damage, trauma, anxiety, a heightened threat detection system calibrated to expect the next catastrophe. This is understandable and human, but it is not the only option. With intention and reflection, the residue of crisis can also include strength, wisdom, expanded capability, and a deeper, quieter confidence in your own capacity to endure. This is what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, and it is real, measurable, and more common than popular culture suggests. People who experience significant adversity and navigate it consciously often report years later that the difficult period became a defining contribution to who they became, not because suffering is good, but because the process of surviving suffering, actively and intentionally, builds something that cannot be built any other way. The first step in building lasting resilience is acknowledging what you have already survived. Most people in crisis are so focused on what is currently threatening them that they fail to notice what they have already demonstrated. They have survived every hard day they have ever had. Every one. The days that felt unsurvivable, the nights that seemed endless, the moments of complete despair. You are still here. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, evidence, actual evidence from your own life that you are more capable than you currently believe. This evidence matters, not as self-congratulation, but as accurate data. You have a track record. You have navigated difficulty before. The specific difficulty you are in right now is new, but the capacity you bring to it is not. It has been built by every hard thing you have already moved through. The second step is identifying what crisis has specifically taught or developed in you. Not abstractly, but concretely. What skill do you now possess that you did not possess before this difficulty? What has your understanding of yourself expanded to include? What do you know about your own needs, limits, strengths, and values that you could only have discovered by being pushed to your edges? These acquisitions are not consolations for suffering. They are the actual content of growth. They are permanent additions to who you are, unlike the circumstances that generated them, which were always temporary. Building resilience deliberately also involves what is sometimes called stress inoculation, the practice of intentionally engaging manageable challenges that build confidence and capability. The idea is simple. The more times you do something difficult and discover that you survived it, the more evidence you accumulate that difficulty is survivable. This evidence becomes the foundation of genuine confidence, not bravado, but the quiet knowing that comes from repeated demonstrated competence. This means seeking out challenges rather than avoiding them during stable periods. Not catastrophic challenges, the kind that expand your capabilities without overwhelming them. The difficult conversation you have been avoiding. The skill you have wanted to develop but been afraid to begin. The situation that makes you uncomfortable, but that you know if you navigated it, would teach you something important. A growth mindset. The conviction that your capacities are not fixed, but can expand through effort, is the psychological context in which resilience is built most effectively. People who view themselves as fundamentally capable of learning and growing recover from adversity more quickly and more completely than people who view difficulty as evidence of their inherent inadequacy. This mindset shift is not a matter of telling yourself motivating stories. It is a matter of asking different questions when difficulty arises. Not why does this keep happening to me, but what is this teaching me? Not how do I avoid ever feeling this bad again, but how do I become better at navigating intensity? The relationships you maintain and invest in during stable periods are also crucial to your resilience during unstable ones. Strong social connections are among the most consistently identified factors in successful recovery from crisis. Not large social networks. Depth matters far more than breadth. Even 2 or 3 relationships with people who genuinely know you, care about your well-being, and will tell you the truth matter enormously when crisis arrives. Invest in those relationships before you need them. Show up for the people in your life when they are struggling. Be honest about your own experience rather than performing competence. Create the kind of reciprocal intimacy that means that when you are in need, you are not starting from zero. You are building through all of this, not immunity to difficulty. That does not exist. You are building something better. Confidence in your capacity to meet difficulty when it arrives, whatever form it takes. That confidence is the foundation of unshakable calm. Making meaning from the wreckage. There is a particular kind of suffering that is not about the circumstances themselves, but about the inability to answer a single question. Why? Not why in the explanatory sense, not what caused this, but why in the meaning sense. What does this have to do with anything that matters? What is the point of this? Why am I going through this? When this question has no answer, suffering becomes disorienting in a way that goes beyond the practical difficulty of the situation. It becomes existential, and existential suffering, the sense that your experience is meaningless and random, is often harder to bear than the circumstances themselves. The psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps of World War II and built an entire school of therapy from what he observed there, arrived at one of the most durable insights in the history of human psychology. Meaning can be found or created in any circumstance, and the presence of meaning makes even extraordinary suffering bearable, while the absence of meaning makes even ordinary suffering unbearable. Frankl's insight was not that everything happens for a reason. He was too honest about human suffering to make that claim. It was that you have the power to decide what your experiences mean to you, and that this decision is one of the most consequential available to you. This is a profound form of freedom. The external circumstances of your life may be beyond your control, but the meaning you make of them is largely within it, not completely. Some things are simply terrible, and no meaning-making fully resolves them, but more than most people realize. The search for meaning during crisis often begins by asking better questions. Instead of, why is this happening to me? A question that implies passive victimhood and usually generates either self-blame or resentment. You might ask, what is this situation making visible to me? What has it clarified about what actually matters to me? What has it taught me about my own strength? What might I be able to offer eventually to someone else who faces something similar? These questions do not deny the difficulty of your experience. They acknowledge it while also pointing beyond it, towards something that can be done with it. One of the most consistent patterns among people who navigate crisis with resilience is that they eventually, not immediately and not easily, but eventually, find ways to use their suffering as a contribution to something larger than themselves. The person who lost a child to addiction and now supports families navigating the same journey. The entrepreneur who failed dramatically and now mentors first-time business owners through their inevitable setbacks. The cancer survivor who becomes a resource for newly diagnosed patients. The person who survived a brutal divorce and now offers honest, compassionate guidance to friends facing their own. This pattern matters not because suffering should be immediately converted into service. Grief requires time, and transformation cannot be forced. It matters because the awareness that your experience might eventually be useful, that what you are going through might one day allow you to help someone who needs exactly what you have learned, can transform the experience from purely destructive to partly generative. Meaning does not require grandeur. The meaning you make of your crisis does not have to be large or universal. It can be quietly personal. Maybe the meaning is simply this: I discovered I was stronger than I knew. I learned to ask for help. I found out which relationships were real. I clarified what I actually value. I became someone I respect more than the person who went into this. These are not small things. They are the substance of a life genuinely lived. The power of true surrender. There is a kind of fighting that makes you stronger, and there is a kind of fighting that destroys you. The difference is not about courage. It is not about the magnitude of what you are facing. It is about what you are fighting against. When you fight to improve your situation, when you work, persist, adapt, advocate, problem solve, reach out, keep going, you are spending your energy in a direction that can actually change things. This fighting builds you. It produces results. It is appropriate and necessary and admirable. When you fight against the fact of your situation, when you spend your resources insisting that things should be different than they are, resisting the reality of what has already occurred, refusing to accept what cannot be changed, you are spending energy in a direction that changes nothing except your own suffering, which it increases. True surrender means stopping the second kind of fighting so you can fully invest in the first. It does not mean passivity. It does not mean resignation. It means redirecting your entire capacity for effort from the unchangeable to the workable, from the past to the present, from what cannot be influenced to what can. This distinction is crucial enough to repeat. Surrendering to what has happened is not the same as surrendering what you can do about it. The first is wisdom. The second is giving up. True surrender involves only the first. Consider what happens in your body when you stop fighting against a current reality you cannot change. There is often a physical sensation, a release of tension that you may not have realized you were holding, a kind of loosening. This is not collapse. It is the body's response to the cessation of a futile effort. The energy that was being spent on resistance becomes, suddenly, available for something else. A man named Oliver had spent 3 years in a custody battle following his divorce. 3 years of litigation, legal fees, emotional exhaustion, and the sustained effort of trying to control outcomes that the legal system would ultimately determine, not him. By the time the legal process concluded with a result that was, from his perspective, deeply unfair, he was depleted in ways he could feel in his body. His therapist asked him to try something, to accept the court's ruling completely, not as fair or right, but as real. To say out loud, "This is the arrangement. This is what is true. I cannot change it. What can I do with it?" Oliver resisted this for weeks. Acceptance felt like approval, and he would never approve of the arrangement. His therapist clarified again, not approval, just acknowledgement of reality. The ruling exists. Fighting against its existence changes nothing. Working with it is the only available path forward. When Oliver finally made this shift, and it was a decision, a conscious act of will, he described it as putting down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. The anger and resistance didn't disappear entirely, but they ceased to be the primary use of his energy. He began redirecting that energy toward the things he actually could influence: the quality of the time he had with his children, his communication with his ex-wife, his own psychological health and stability, outcomes that had seemed impossible within the previous framework, a more functional co-parenting dynamic, genuine warmth in his relationship with his children during the time they shared, became possible when he stopped fighting the framework and started working within it. Surrender also applies to outcomes you are actively pursuing. One of the most sophisticated practices available to human beings is the combination of wholehearted effort and genuine non-attachment to results. You give everything you have to improving your situation. You work diligently, consistently, intelligently, and you hold the results lightly, not because you don't care, but because you understand that many factors affecting outcomes are beyond your control. This is not indifference. It is the combination of full engagement and full acceptance, caring completely about the process while remaining at peace with whatever the process produces. This combination allows you to give your best without being emotionally devastated by outcomes that don't match your intentions. The deepest surrender is not to circumstances, but to yourself, to the acknowledgement that you do not need circumstances to be perfect in order to be okay, that your fundamental well-being does not depend on everything going as planned, that you are, at the level that matters most, going to be all right regardless of what the world throws at you. This trust does not develop from positive thinking. It develops from evidence, from repeated discoveries that you survive things you weren't sure you could survive, that you found ways forward when the path was completely unclear, that the inner room was there even when you had forgotten how to find it. Each navigation of difficulty adds another layer of evidence. Over time, the accumulation becomes something that functions like bedrock, not the certainty that hard things won't happen, but the quiet confidence that when hard things happen, you will find your way through. Rebuilding with intention after crisis, there is a period that many people find more difficult than the crisis itself. The acute phase has passed. The immediate emergency is over. Life is beginning to restabilize. And now you face a question that sounds simple, but is actually one of the most complex and important you will ever encounter. What now? Not how do I return to what I had? That is the wrong question, though it is almost everyone's first instinct. The life that was disrupted is gone, not necessarily in all its elements, but in its exact form, its exact assumptions, its exact relationship to who you were before the crisis. You are different now. You know things you didn't know before. You have values that have been clarified or shifted. You have a relationship with uncertainty that has been fundamentally altered. The question is not how do I get back? The question is, what do I actually want to build? This distinction matters enormously. Many people spend enormous energy after crisis trying to recreate precisely what was lost. The same kind of job in the same kind of company. The same relationship dynamic with a different person. The same lifestyle with different decorations. This impulse is understandable. Familiarity feels like safety, especially after a period of unfamiliar disruption. But it misses the opportunity that crisis uniquely offers, the chance to rebuild more intentionally than the first time. When you first built your life, when you chose your career direction, your relationship patterns, your daily habits, your definition of success, you were making choices from a younger, less experienced position. You were working with limited information about yourself. You were probably heavily influenced by external expectations, by what seemed appropriate, by what others around you were doing. A crisis clears all of that, not permanently, not completely, but temporarily the structures that defined you are gone. And in that temporary clearing, you have access to a question you may never have been able to ask with such clarity. What do I actually want my life to look like? Not what looks impressive. Not what your parents hope for. Not what your peer group considers successful. What you, the person you now are, with everything you now know, with the values that this experience has clarified, actually want. This question deserves time and honesty. It is worth sitting with it before rushing to fill the space with the first available option. The urgency to reconstruct normalcy as quickly as possible is real and understandable, especially if financial or practical pressures are demanding action. But even within those pressures, some measure of intentionality about direction is possible. The difference between rebuilding reactively, grabbing whatever is available, and rebuilding intentionally, making choices that align with what you have learned about yourself, compounds dramatically over time. Intentional rebuilding begins with honest self-assessment. What from your previous life genuinely served your well-being and aligned with your actual values? What were you maintaining from habit, obligation, or fear, without ever stopping to ask whether it was right for you? What did you want that you never allowed yourself to pursue? What did you consistently postpone, telling yourself you would do it later, when things calmed down, when the time was right? The time is right now. The crisis has cleared space. What do you want to build in it? The rebuilding also requires what might be called strategic patience, the willingness to move forward steadily without demanding immediate completion. Meaningful reconstruction takes time. Physical healing cannot be rushed without risking re-injury. Psychological rebuilding operates similarly. Expecting full recovery and complete reconstruction on a rushed timeline is both inaccurate and counterproductive. Set realistic markers of progress. Celebrate small forward movements. Understand that setbacks during rebuilding are normal, not evidence that recovery has failed, but evidence that recovery is nonlinear, as all real processes are. A bad week after several good ones is not regression. It is part of the pattern. The life rebuilt after crisis is often, genuinely not as consolation, better than the life that was disrupted. Not because crisis was good, but because you are applying something the first time didn't have. Hard-won knowledge of what actually matters, what actually lasts, and what you are actually capable of. Wisdom, forged in fire. There is a category of knowledge that cannot be transferred by reading about it, or attending a seminar, or listening to someone who has been through it. It can only be acquired by going through it yourself. This is the knowledge that crisis forges. It is not the knowledge of facts or techniques. It is the knowledge of yourself, of your actual limits and your actual strengths, of what you can endure and what you cannot, of what matters to you when everything that doesn't matter has been stripped away. It is knowledge that lives not in your mind, but in your body, your bones, your instincts. People who have navigated serious crisis and come through it with their integrity intact carry something that is immediately visible to others, even if not easily named. A kind of groundedness, a quiet confidence that is not performative, an ability to be fully present with difficulty, others as well as their own, without flinching or fleeing. This quality is what I mean by wisdom forged in fire. And it is, in the truest sense, a gift, though a gift that comes at a price no one would voluntarily pay if they understood the full cost in advance. Among the things that crisis teaches, perhaps the most practical is the reality of impermanence. You have now lived through the experience of something that seemed permanent dissolving. You have discovered in the most direct way possible that external circumstances, even the ones that felt most stable and certain, are not fixed. They change, they end, they transform. This knowledge, properly integrated, creates something valuable: genuine humility during good times and genuine hope during hard ones. You hold success more lightly because you know it is not permanent. You hold difficulty more lightly too, for the same reason. The equanimity that the world's wisdom traditions describe, the capacity to remain balanced and centered regardless of whether circumstances are favorable or not, begins to become available. Crisis also teaches, at the deepest level, the limits and the liberation of control. Before significant adversity, most people carry the illusion that sufficient effort and intelligence can manage most outcomes. Crisis dismantles this illusion. But what replaces it is not helplessness. It is something better. A clear-eyed understanding of what is actually yours to influence, combined with peace about what is not. The freedom that comes from releasing the exhausting project of trying to manage what was never manageable. The experience of needing others and being helped by them tends to shift something fundamental in how people understand their relationship to community and interdependence. The person who navigates crisis alone and survives is remarkable, but they often emerge with a sharper awareness of what they missed by not allowing help. The person who navigates crisis with the genuine support of others often comes through with something even more valuable: a renewed and deepened understanding that human beings are built for connection, that the independence we prize is real but incomplete, and that receiving care graciously is itself a form of strength. Appreciation deepens after crisis in ways that are difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced them. Ordinary things become extraordinary. A meal that you can afford and enjoy, the safety of sleeping in your own bed, the sound of a person you love laughing. These experiences, which were invisible in their ordinariness before, become visible after crisis in a way that generates genuine, uncomplicated joy. Not happiness dependent on things going well, but appreciation independent of that. Presence to what is here, right now, simply because you have learned what it is to be without. Perhaps the most important wisdom crisis generates is the discovery of what the wisdom traditions have always pointed to: that your essential self, the awareness that witnesses your thoughts, the presence that endures beneath your circumstances, the part of you that remained you even when everything else changed, is more fundamental and more stable than anything that happened to you. You are not your job. You are not your relationship status. You are not your financial position. You are not your reputation or your achievements or your social role. All of these can change, and some of them did change during your crisis. And you are still here, still yourself, still capable of thought, choice, connection, and meaning. This is the bedrock. And once you have found it, really found it, not just as an idea but as a lived reality, nothing can shake you all the way down. Circumstances can shake the surface. They cannot reach the foundation. The unshakable life. You have arrived somewhere, not at the end of difficulty. Difficulty will return, because that is the nature of a life fully lived, not at a position of immunity from pain. Pain will come again, because that is the nature of being human and caring about things. But you have arrived at something more valuable than immunity: the capacity to be fully present to your life, including its hardest parts, without being destroyed by them. This is what it means to become unshakable. Not rigid, not closed, not defended behind walls of emotional armor. Unshakable in the way a great tree is unshakable: roots deep, branches flexible, capable of moving with the wind without being uprooted by it. The person who has become unshakable feels fear. They feel grief. They feel anger and frustration and uncertainty. But these experiences move through them rather than defining them. The emotions are weather, not identity. They are real. They are felt. They are attended to. And they pass. And what remains beneath and beyond them is the ground. This ground, the inner room you have been building, the acceptance you have been practicing, the meaning you have been creating, the resilience you have been developing, is yours. It cannot be taken from you. It was forged in difficulty, and it has become a permanent part of who you are. The unshakable person locates their security internally, not in circumstances being favorable, or in other people behaving well, or in the future unfolding as hoped. Inside, in their relationship with their own values, their own capacity for choice, their own access to wisdom and stillness, their own knowledge that they can handle whatever comes. This internal location of security does not make them indifferent to the world. It makes them more genuinely available to it. Because when your security is internal, you can be fully present with others without being threatened by their need. You can engage with difficulty without being paralyzed by it. You can love without clinging, help without losing yourself, commit without demanding guarantees. The unshakable person has also made peace with uncertainty, not a forced peace, not the performance of calm over underlying dread. A real peace, earned by having lived through not knowing and having discovered again and again that not knowing does not kill you, that you can navigate by whatever light is available, even when the full path is invisible, that you have what it takes to meet each new challenge as it arrives, even if you cannot see it coming. This peace with uncertainty is perhaps the most radical transformation that crisis makes possible, because uncertainty is not a temporary condition that will eventually resolve. It is the fundamental nature of existence. The only way to be fully at peace with life is to make peace with the fact that you will never fully know what comes next. And the only way to make that peace is to have tested your capacity to navigate not knowing and found it sufficient. You have now tested it. You have been inside the storm. You have discovered that the storm did not break you, that whatever it broke, it was not the essential you. And in that discovery lives your power. Not the power to prevent difficulty, not the power to guarantee outcomes, the power to choose your response to whatever comes, the power to find the inner room in the center of any storm, the power to remain at the deepest level, yourself, grounded, present, open, capable, and at peace. This is the calm inside the chaos. This is what you were building all along. This is the unshakable life.